Good morning, one and all. Welcome. I am here with Gabe and Ty and Delmar and MK, and others will follow this morning, Sunday, and welcome you. I appreciate you being here, appreciate your ears. The thought for the day is to consider that this conversation is not a search for why, but a concession that. Meaning, rather than look for the pair of glasses or the hat that we're wearing, start noticing that what we're doing, if we're not paying attention to it, is probably not going to make much sense to be looking for anything else until we begin to concede the doing that we're doing. And the doing we're typically doing is thinking. And so what we're here for is not to look and search, but to simply concede what we're doing is what we're doing and start talking about things that are rather than maybe, should be, could be, might have been, will be, etc. And start to notice that the present state of our awareness is always present and that it's worth attending to, paying attention to, since it's happening. And it isn't something that is happening just because I'm thinking about it. It's happening whether or not I'm thinking at all. And by conceding that, it begins to put thinking into its proper place, which is something I do rather than who I think I am. So we have nothing to tell you, so there's nothing you need. Yet we suggest at the same time that you already know, that if you are part of a knowing awareness of any sort, you would have a greater sense of knowing than you may think you do. And this isn't about asking you to believe or trust or have faith or hope in what is said either, because to believe in what does not exist is useless. So if we are trying to develop belief and faith in things that have no basis, it's useless. Yet when we believe in what exists, we align our thought and belief with what exists, and our experience confirms the existence of what exists and no longer requires belief because we're experiencing it. It's just naturally allowed us the chance to see that aligning our thoughts gives us a much different experience, the same way the experience of malaligned thoughts give us a sense of conflict and disconnect and depression. One requires a fight, the other one exhibits peace, ease, stability, calm. Easy to notice what you're doing if you simply look at the results you're getting, the circumstances, the experience you're having. All we ask is that you consider what you hear and notice how you respond internally. You don't have to talk about it. You don't have to mention it to anybody. But if you start noticing it on your own, you'll start noticing that consideration is an awakened contemplative meditation, and it does not require a decision. It's literally just letting things be. It's considering them, just letting them float. If there's a question, let it be a question. There's no need for an answer. Just let it float and see if the change of your awareness isn't more obvious in a way that's meaningful and useful than when you think you need to immediately conclude something and jump to the next action, to the next action, to the next action in some reactive fashion. Consideration doesn't require a decision, and responsibility is a sign of life. So responsibility is a basis for our existence, while chronic reactivity is overdosing on adrenaline to fight what is happening only in thought. It's not actually happening beyond the thinking we're doing when we take on those fights, because all that's in conflict are the thoughts we're having. And this basically underutilizes and undermines our functional capacity. So productivity drops and fear is caused and anxiety is caused for good reason, because the things we're doing and thinking about in thinking are wrong, thought to be right. We're in conflict with reality. We think we can be in conflict with reality, but really all we are is preoccupied with what we're thinking what we're thinking is so true and real. If we keep thinking about it further, it will become reality. which never happens. And you may notice that that's never happened for you yet. And I would suggest it's not going to. So coming to terms with what's happening is very different. Addiction is a mental problem promoting the idea we can escape problems while we insist on recreating them and maintaining them. As long as we try to escape, we fail. So no matter how hard we try, no matter how hard we try, enough is never enough. And that would pretty much describe addiction. More and more and more and more never seems to solve the problem. So we do more and more and more because we're not looking at the problem accurately. And the problem in addiction is centered in thought, which is our mental state. And if we think what we think is priority or primary to our existence, we're thinking out of order. We're putting thinking as the primary source of existence. And thinking out of order leads to disorders, anxiety disorders, stress, etc. This isn't a medical diagnosis. This is just experiential. Coming out of a sober experience from having been freed from a symptom of addiction and starting to see that the underlying issue is a mental obsession that, if not treated, will drive anyone who has it back to compulsive behaviors. And you may notice in your life, you have compulsive behaviors. Overcoming and recovering from a primary compulsive behavior does not eliminate other compulsions or impulsive or reactive behaviors. So the vain attempt of trying to escape this condition that we create gives us a sense of being disconnected and alone. And if that disconnection and alone is coming from the thoughts we have because they have no substance, no basis, no place in reality, and we're thinking that it's everything else, the whole world is going to look as though we're disconnected from it and we're lonely and we're all sorts of things that aren't actually true. They're just self-induced states of thought. To seek what is not lost is to struggle with a thought, not reality. If the thought is lost, it has no basis. If it's looking for something that it's creating and trying to blame it on everything else, it's not going to find it. So we're not here to seek anything, since what is not lost can't be found. We're here to begin to listen to what we're thinking in relation to what is said and share your thoughts if you'd like. If you're not here on the Zoom meeting where you can share actively, there are other people in your life you can talk to about this and start to share your thoughts and see how they react and see how they respond and start to see the interaction between us is very clarifying when we're willing to be honest about what we're actually doing rather than the thoughts we have that generally put us in contempt of others and hold them in low esteem and wonder why we feel low esteem. So contempt, condemnation, spite, and a fight only occur in conflicted thoughts. It's not what we think about that bothers us. It's the thinking we think about the stuff we think about that is bothersome and troublesome. There's nothing closer to our experience that we can voluntarily do but think about things. So the impact on it is on us is immediate on our experience. And to overlook that impact is to think the problem has nothing to do with us. And so what does it do? Perpetuate the problem. It's just more of a lie. Chuck Chamberlain wrote a book called A New Pair of Glasses, and he said, we come with what we are looking for. And he's talking about people entering sobriety, a sober conversation, and looking for it, and realizing it's actually what they've been looking with the whole time. The looking with has been the problem. They haven't been seeing it because they haven't thought that it was there. Who we are is a product of whatever existence is based on. So that is the essence of our basis. That product. We are a product of it. We are not the creator of it. We're not the concluder of it. We're not the decisive factor in it. We are simply an expression of it. And our nature is designed to express the natural order of how things are, not to figure out how to think that thinking is primary and disorder out of order, and then act out of order and wonder why we feel condemned to it. To consider how we think things actually are is to begin to notice that we think we can actually replace nature when we think about them as they aren't. And that's very unnatural. When we concede what we're doing is what we're doing, we're not in conflict. Could be right or wrong. Doesn't matter. As long as we're willing to allow what's happening to be happening, there is no conflict in it, and it's educational. It's a guided system for us. To think what we're doing is not what we're doing is to be in conflict with everything we see and think about. So seeing through a cloudy lens always has everything appear cloudy. Addiction is the claim that a lie will one day be true, and that wrong will be right, and right will be wrong. Someday, just never today. It can't be today because this is what everything happens today, now. The impression we're alone is one created in thoughts. Considering that the basis of our existence is absolute and unlimited and infinite and omnipotent does not require belief, yet if we believe in it, we'll see that the application of that consideration will actually have a useful consequence, which will mean greater ease, a greater sense of awareness, a greater chance to actually notice what we're doing if what we're doing is wrong. The clarity actually offers us an opportunity to recognize other things we may be doing wrong, other than the primary thought we're struggling with in the immediacy of our experience right now. Even a person who believes that there is nothing greater than reason, considering something infinite as something that's inescapable would make perfect reason if they're willing to actually use reason. Because something infinite would be something that couldn't hold us in contempt. It couldn't condemn us to it because it gives us everything. It provides everything. It isn't something that can take or give because it just simply is everything. It's not even the beginning or end. It's just the essence of all it is as it is. An addiction would have us believe we can escape that by being stuck in a condition that we can't escape. And that's just simply a lie. And delusion has never been true, and it never will be true. And to begin to see that the lies we maintain and the obsessions are the obsessions we maintain, and to see that they're nothing more than what we maintain them as being by making believe somehow they're true and they'll work someday, is to notice the insanity of making believe that something that doesn't even exist can have any impact on us at all. And that begins to dissolve this problem rather than create a new resolution to feel better about what we're doing that's wrong. In algebra, when the infinite was applied, when the calculus was being developed, they applied the infinite. And all of a sudden, the choppy points, the intersections of all the points of algebra that led to choppy curves gracefully turned into smooth, beautiful forms. And even the mathematicians said, we're not saying there's anything infinite, but when you apply it, it works. And I would say the same thing to anyone listening. If you simply consider that the infinite is infinite, and if it's infinite, it isn't something we're going to talk our way in or out of. It isn't something we need to find or search. It's actually the nature of our existence, and it is the clarity we have to even know when we're wrong so clearly. So knowing we're wrong is actually evidence of something that is right, because if all we were was wrong, that would be right, and we would feel fulfilled by it. So with that, as a little bit of an introduction, I want to say good morning to everyone who's here, and there's a couple more people who've been waiting for my long-winded words to come in. Good morning, Anthony. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning.
That's a significant amount of drugs.
And welcome everyone else too. We are an anonymous group so that we can talk about our 12-step experiences collectively and not violate the tradition of anonymity or the spiritual foundation of anonymity, which is about unity. It's about inclusiveness. It's not about excluding anyone who's interested in being a part of. And I would suggest that if you're even capable of considering being a part of, you're already a part of it, if what we're talking about has any actual basis to it. You're already a part, and whether you consider it or not is irrelevant, though your consideration of it in actual relation to what's happening certainly has an impact on your experience. So guys, good morning.
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 Morning, John.
Hi.
I didn't see you, so I said guys and gals
I'm
and
now
gals.
behind his phone.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Too many.
Normally it takes us a good hour to get to silence.
No, for me, Jack, Gabe here. Every time I hear that intro, it's a complete definition of my previous week of thinking things that aren't there and letting them rule the day. Whereas in the past, they would rule the entire week. Now they sort of rule the entire day or the entire morning. So they're getting shorter, but literally thinking up things that aren't there, that don't exist. And my question is, like, as a rational person, as a logical person, I presume I am, there still seems to be a little bit of an insanity there of, okay, that didn't happen. I thought it would. Okay, it didn't. And then the next morning, I'm right back to square zero of, here it is again. Maybe you could talk about that. Of, even though I hear these things and feel good when this meeting begins and ends, it's going to happen sometime this week again. It's going to continue to go, even though I literally know that it's not true or not happening as I see it at the time.
Well, the beautiful thing of freedom is that we're free to screw things up whenever we want. And it's the same with possibility. If all things are always possible, and I would say right now, everything that's possible is possible. So one of the possibilities is to be honest about what we're actually doing and experiencing right here, being present, and start to talk about it in terms that might be useful when you're sitting by your desk and you're confronted by circumstances that aren't going where you thought they should or would, and begin to notice how compelling those thoughts are in terms of creating imagination in relation to the conflicts that seem to be occurring, when in fact you're really just swirling in thoughts. But if all possibility is always possible, it's always possible that we can mistake what we're doing and misutilize our experience. It's always possible. And in a sense, that's the freedom of neutrality, and the idea that neutrality isn't a fight. It's literally a non-position. It's being directly in between any extremes, right in the center all the time. It's being in a place of choice and freedom. And part of the early part of that opening is to look, rather than why, look at that. If we're looking at what's happening, that's happening. It's probably more educational to just notice how inclined we are to rely on this mode of thinking so quickly, that there must be a depth to it in our psyche that we've relied on so long that we've drilled a canyon through. And these are all just imaginary forms that I'm using words for, that we've drilled a canyon through, and it's just a rut we keep falling into because of the perpetual nature of having done it so many times, hoping one day it would become true, hoping one day it would finally work. When in fact, most of our experiences told us it's never worked. It's just worked us, worn us out, driven us crazy. You know, my experience is I don't need to be driven crazy. I'm there. I don't need a driver and I don't need a vehicle. The vehicle is already hyperactively awaiting my choice not to have what I'm doing. So I think the bigger issue, Gabe, for me in my experience, and many of the guys that I work with directly, is that if I can begin to concede simply what I'm doing, where I am as I'm doing it, since it's actually what I'm doing, whether I'm doing what's right or wrong, the awareness becomes immediate that what I'm doing is either crazy or it's sane. It's either insane or it's sane. And it starts to become obvious to me. So when I look at what I'm doing, I can stop and say, this doesn't make any sense. This really doesn't make any sense. And yet I'm doing it. That's really interesting, that I seem to be on this automatic pilot that I don't even seem to be in control of, or I've developed opinions to disclaim the responsibility of it for so long that I think, again, it's not happening by me, it's not caused by me, it's happening to me. And just shifting a little bit. Now, if nature is natural and the nature of our existence is infinite and absolute and stable, then beginning to notice that and say, well, what I'm experiencing that feels unstable is actually a reflection of my stability. Wouldn't seem unstable if everything about me was unstable. The uniformity of instability would be consistent. It would be aligned. But the fact that it isn't aligned is a clue that there's something going on that I'm not even considering and thinking about. Or that my thinking is just hell-bent again on thinking, and it's going around and around and around in the old circle of fear, thinking if I experience more and more fear and anxiety, somehow I'll sort things out better because I'll just kick my ass into doing the thing that I never seem to do. And what I'm really not doing is simply paying attention to what I'm doing right now. And my experience was I got a very sick stomach when I started looking and realized how sick I had been. And I mean, as long as I can remember, I had a nausea in my stomach that was very tight and very sick, and I didn't want to experience. And there was a point that I threw up. I got so sick, and this ball of salty mucus came out of my stomach that was a glob that had been, when it left, that feeling left. And I realized that I had secreted this stuff through the anxiety that I had been creating. It had slowly built up the feeling to justify the anxiety was true. And when I finally looked at it, it came out. And I realized that thing was this ball of this acidic sickness that I had in my stomach. So my manifestation in a physical form, very much a reflection of the thinking I'm doing and the stress I'm putting my body under by doing that thinking. So health is natural, and we get better quicker when we consider it at all. And sometimes, Gabe, the thing you think you're doing that is so bad, you're not doing anywhere near as badly as you used to do, but your awareness of it is so much clearer, it seems absurd that you would be doing it at all. And that's the dissipation.
100%.
What's that, Jenna?
I agree with that so much. We don't recognize the less that we're doing it, it's not as recognizable. But then when something flares up, it's we're very aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the smaller, what happens is something smaller it's like getting a piece of sand in your eye. Kind of screws up your seeing until you get it out. It's not big, but it seems big because it's attached to the eye that sees. And the awareness, growth generally is beginning to see what's wrong clearer, rather than think in this addictive term that we're going to be fixed and we're never going to think of it again and everything's just going to be a skipping jump rope experience. We're just going to have fun like kids. And the fact is, there's a lot going on in the world that's disturbing, I would say, from my vantage point. And what's happened when I've gotten outside the scope of making my own problems everything is starting to see that I am in and amongst people that are struggling with this same thing. And they are near and far. And some people are doing things that manifest the insanity of thinking that thinking insanely is a solution. Violence and aggression and these seemingly unprovoked murderous rages that kids are going off on. This isn't a coincidence. It's a consequence of a collective nature of thinking that's been going on and hasn't been addressed properly for a long time. That was my short answer, Gabe. So thoughts on that, Gabe?
Well, I want to take a step back and say, for those possibly listening, that my history of those thoughts were, crying in the bathroom for hours, or just like you, Jack, throwing up because of a thought. literally being so scared into vomiting over something that's not happening. So those things no longer exist, no longer happen. But yeah, I guess it's always been that sort of addictive nature of looking for that perfection, that equilibrium of forever, that nothing's ever going to be wrong, no one's ever going to hurt me. I need to feel safe and hugged for eternity, which is not a natural possibility. When you say all things are possible, I mean, I guess that is, if all things are possible, that one route is possible, but probably not probable.
Yes. And remember, too, that things that seem possible to thought aren't necessarily possible. You know, the idea that I can be, as you're talking about, to think of those things as things I actually am, rather than to see that what we actually are is not based in thought. It's based in what seems like spirit or some infinite, unknown, invisible source, something that can't be quantified. And in that realm, all those things you just talked about wanting, you already have. You're held because you can't escape something, but the thing you can't escape that's absolute doesn't condemn you because it gives you everything that you can possibly ever want. Because there's nothing shy in it. There's nothing missing in it. There's no parts and pieces. There's no more or less. It just is what it is. And I know this can seem absolutely absurd to reason, but when reason is used to construct unreasonable conclusions, why wouldn't it seem preposterous to even consider something that's possible? And if the infinite is possible, considering it would maybe have a greater impact on our awareness, because it's the application of principles that confirms their usefulness. It's not just thinking about them. We can think about them and have a greater sense of ease, but when we apply them, like in mathematics, if you apply the principles, the problems start to work. And what happens? The problems aren't problems anymore. They're just exercises. So our exercise here is beginning, if we can concede that and start to see that very often what we're looking for is what we have. And I would say that's always the case, always the case. And we can think we don't have it because what we're thinking with are limited thoughts about the body we have and the things we have and the things we think we need. And most of the things we think we need are just wants on crack. They're desires that we're hoping to get. And we seem never to be fulfilled by them when we do get them. The emptiness becomes clearer when we do because we thought we could be full, but we're already full. The emptiness is in the thought. It's in the recognition that empty thoughts are like lies. They have no substance. They have no place. They have no space. They don't exist anywhere other than in our own thinking. And even there, they're delusional. They're imagination considered to be real. And when fantasy becomes reality, it's a pretty good definition of insanity. And I would, for simplicity, just suggest that insanity is not sane, if anybody needs that clarification. And it doesn't take a big leap to be insane. It doesn't take being completely incapacitated and living in a world where you cannot function at all. Where we normally consider people that are insane as people completely out of the realm of our experience. They're very unique individuals. It's not that unique to have mentally ill thoughts. It's actually pretty common. And the bridge between addiction is a mental health problem, and it's treated as though it's something different than mental health issues. And I would suggest that all of us who have been in addiction have basic disorders, mental disorders, like obsessive compulsive, manic depressive. All those things are typical for us. And yet they're treated as though they're separate. The infancy of this discussion in society and in science is very, very clear. It has not been talked about openly through history. Bill Wilson was probably, he was the latest pioneer of people that were looking and wondering, how is this happening? Why is this happening? What can we do about it? And yet the mental aspect of it has been considered something that isn't a problem as much as the use of substances rather than beginning to realize the ultimate substance abuse is making believe that a lie has any substance. The ultimate substance abuse is giving lie credit for having any substance. It doesn't have substance, and the substance abuse is pretending it does. That releases chemicals in our body because of the fear that's created, rightfully so, because our body knows when we're doing something wrong. We know when we're doing something wrong. And to think that it's right is to set off constantly on that course of trying to feel better about what's wrong, coming up with solutions to attach to and give us the impression that somehow if we can finally get there, we'll be better. But there never seems to be here because we're not practicing simply recognizing what we are doing, where we are with what we have as we are now. There's not a lot of practice and time spent doing that, especially in group settings. One-on-one, it's probably more common because, I did a lot of psychotherapy, being psychotic and, beginning to talk about what was going on relieved me enormously because I never knew anybody was willing to listen to what I was actually thinking, which was some pretty dark stuff and upsetting stuff. So talking about it openly in a larger group and talking about it publicly in the way podcasts allow us to do, where we can maintain our anonymity and allow the listeners to maintain theirs and in the privacy of their own thinking, consider things that might be difficult to consider in public or in person. Start to engage around that.
Yeah, the stuff we talk about, it's a very difficult conversation for most people because there's a part of, what's the word? I thought of it earlier. There's a part of responsibility that comes along with it. You have to acknowledge that you're actively doing some of these things, and most people they'd prefer to not. It's something else. Someone else is doing it. I'm not.
Well, I'll help you on that point, Michael. When I just began to admit I was doing all of them rather than some, I stopped debating who was doing more than me, and really began to just concede that if I'm doing it at all, I'm doing all of it. And it stopped this whole conversation in my head over who else was responsible, as though I was a judge in a courtroom trying to assign responsibility for the right proportion of it. And it completely eliminated the conversation. I just said, I'm responsible. That's it. If I am built on a responsible platform, then that is my nature. And I would suggest it's all of our natures. And I would suggest it's why we know when we're irresponsible that something is wrong. And we're not actually irresponsible. We're just thinking irresponsible thoughts and as a result, acting irresponsibly. And that's a big difference than being irresponsible. We wouldn't know if we were irresponsible, we wouldn't notice it when we acted that way. We would seem normal.
But again, I always ask, how do you identify that? That's the biggest struggle is where do you get to a point where you just continue down this path your entire life and you just live the way you live and deny versus taking a different path. I think it's a challenge. Space.
You know the difference.
I know. I'm now aware of the difference. Having conversations like this.
How would you describe it?
I really don't know how to I've tried to describe it, and it's challenging because it comes back to a lot of the stuff we talk about, which is allowing things to happen. Stop with the controlling, stop with the idea that my thoughts, and I've been challenging myself every day, is how limiting are my thoughts? How limiting are my thoughts? Because that's kind of where my walls start. And how much can I keep pushing that out? How far can I keep pushing that wall so that I can stop being limited by my thoughts?
Well, but the more you push it out, the more limited you get. You just get a bigger expanse of limitation, which would not be the goal here.
I know.
It's beginning to see, it isn't a matter of stopping what we're doing. It's a matter of doing what we're doing that gives us the freedom. And if I'm simply thinking a thought that's limited and thinking the thought I'm thinking is limited, I'm not condemned to that thought anymore. But if I think that thought is something I need to expand to become bigger, all I'm doing is perpetuating the idea that I need to maintain it at all costs to get it bigger, to somehow or another have it big enough someday where it won't be there, but it will always be limited no matter how big I make it. And when I'm making it limited relative to an infinite source, I'm condemned by that thought. I have created a new line of demarcation that I'm defending rather than simply see, this is something I can. It's just like thinking about munchkins, from the Wizard of Oz. I don't have to think that they're real and true to imagine them. I can just think of fantasy things. I can think of Smurfs. I don't have to believe they're real and true to imagine them. But when I start chronically thinking that they're really real and they're really true, and I've done it for decades, I start thinking I can't stop doing what I've done for so long. And that doesn't happen over decades. It happens in the present now, in the willingness I have to continue to maintain those thoughts in any other way than simply say they're delusional, they're imagined to be true, when in fact they're simply imagined. And if I start noticing that all of my thoughts are imagined, it becomes a lot easier to notice that they have no control on me at all, that I'm not giving them. And when I give it to them, I'm trying to blame them for doing what I'm unwilling to stop. So that's me doing that.
Jack, remember when I became responsible by accident, and it was my huge liberation though, because what Mike had said was we are by nature embarrassed to admit our responsibility. Well, my responsibility came as a great aha, just doing what we have been discussing and talking about it. And it was a huge liberation because all of my stories completely dissipated, because that's exactly what they were. They were my stories, and none of the hurts or ugly, mean, or bad things that had ever happened in my life I was responsible for it, and I wasn't embarrassed anymore. I was just kind of like, wow, all that stuff I create around it to create my story or my wounded bird or even my happy bird, it was all bullshit. And I wasn't embarrassed of the responsibility. I was so grateful for it that I called you laughing and crying at the same time. I got it. But I have had 3 steps back since then.
It wasn't an accident. It was literally just a consequence of beginning to consider something accurate.
Yes.
It isn't an accident when all of a sudden we get honest enough to speak in terms even to ourselves that are accurate and let things be. The fact is, we can be as sick as we want, and if we're as sick as we want to be and admit we're as sick as we want to be, that simple concession in that general way puts to rest a lot of the conflict we'd otherwise have by thinking we shouldn't be what we're doing or shouldn't feel what we're thinking or thinking what we're thinking. As soon as we take on all this stuff of trying to define it and have it in some way that's varied, rather than just say, look, I'm thinking what I'm thinking, and that thinking that I'm thinking is causing the effects that I'm feeling, and I'm doing it. I'm doing it right now. Whatever I'm doing right now, I'm doing right now. I could sit here and try to tell you what I'm doing, but there's no way I'm going to wrap words around it as accurately as I can when I simply say I'm doing what I'm doing, and start to think in absolute terms by aligning what's happening is what's happening is what's happening, and start noticing that there's a great deal, this going back to your point, MK, there's a great deal of peace that comes when I stop the internal debate over what's happening, because what's been happening has always been happening as it's been happening, regardless of what I thought anyhow. And if I just start letting that happen as it's happening, I realize that all I'm doing, I'm not starting it from happening. I'm starting to allow it to simply be what it is rather than what I think of it. And now my thinking is freer to start actually thinking about things productively rather than uselessly.
I realized I've been, or conceded that I've been kind of self-isolating in a way. I've always been someone that needed to be around a lot of people, wanted to go to a lot of things, wanted to talk to everybody. Like I was always externalizing and, having conversations about problems, life, whatever it is. And recently I don't want to go anywhere, not because I'm not interested in it, but I need that time to sit and be with myself and not allow that external influence. Because the minute I get out of the house, or the minute I come across someone at work, and the minute I go do something, I right away identify I'm starting to project and receive what they're doing in this weird way. And I'm like, oh, you're doing it again. Like, stop, back up.
But it isn't, listen, it's not about stopping. It's about beginning to do it, beginning to embrace it, beginning to be willing to see that if you've been willing to do it so long and you're so sick and tired of it, that you clearly are not tired of it to be still sick of doing it. So,
Well, I guess the way my mind works is I want to understand it.
of course,
I want to
that's
know.
why you can't figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. Because I want to have an idea of like why and what, and then I just think, well, just sit, just stay, and don't continue the same pattern in a sense.
So, Michael, the understanding, that's exactly how the introduction opened. This isn't about why, it's about that.
Mhm.
And when we think about this, if we're not willing to concede what we're doing right here, this is like me wearing my glasses and looking for my glasses. If I'm not willing to do what I'm doing and I go looking for my glasses and I'm wearing them, everywhere I look, I'm actually finding them and thinking I'm not. That's the same with asking, why am I doing what I'm doing and not even conceding what I'm doing? How much reason am I going to have that's going to make any sense by trying to think about what I'm doing when I haven't even conceded I'm doing it? The one thing I can be sure of right now, and I would suspect all of us can, is that we're doing exactly what we're doing right now. And what's happening right now everywhere is happening exactly as it's happening right now. It's not happening as it should be happening. It's not happening as it might be happening. It's not happening as it could be happening. It's not happening as I want it to be happening. It's just happening, period. And when I start conceding that, that's really where consideration becomes a meditative awakened contemplation. And an awakened contemplation that is an awakened meditation. It's starting to recognize that my awareness is much broader than the narrow focal points I try to attach to and think that I've got to make my point. And if you listen to people's story, they generally want to get to the point, but they never get to the point. It just goes on and on and on in 1,000 other little points that never quite make the point. And I do the same thing. And yet speaking in moral terms, principled terms, is beginning to see that I can make the point without telling the story. Because the point is where I am now is where we all are. And what is happening right now for everyone is absolutely the same. We may be seeing different things and we may be near different things, but the state of that underlying absolute state of everything happening when it's looked at as something that's happening for everybody, you begin to realize that we're all sharing it right now. And there is no division in that. There is no discrimination. There is no inequity. There is no distinguished characteristics. It's just what's happening. It's not a judgment.
Earlier, when he told that story about his two friends, he was telling what happened.
Mhm.
And he gave us the what. And instantly, then I start wondering, okay, why did it happen? Why,
Yeah.
were they successful in a job career? Were they habitual, chronic, homeless? So that, do you just stop and feel comfortable that, okay, that's what happened? And
Well,
there is no response needed, or do you need to know that why for yourself and self-preservation?
comfortable or not, it happened, right?
Right.
So if we can become at ease with what's happening, even if it's diseased and uncomfortable, if we can come at ease with it, there's a good chance there's a lot more information in the ease because we'll be aware of what's going on rather than in the lack of ease that creates a desperation that has us think we're going to attach to some excuse and then figure out, look at the policies that have gone on in terms of addiction. If things are at an all-time high, they've never worked for that to be the case.
That hit me like 2 days ago. What you've said that I don't know how many times, and I was driving down the road and it hit me because I was thinking about that same thing. I'm like, wait a minute, everything we've been doing got us here. It's clearly not working.
Exactly. Well, listen, it's working to the degree that it's not working, and somehow people are surviving, and that's kind of miraculous.
Yeah.
To think of how depraved we can be in our thinking and still manage to survive is a pretty good indication that we have an enormously capable durability to survive.
Yeah, but the insanity is then you bring up something that is completely the opposite of what we've been doing, and they tell you that won't work.
Well,
haven't done it.
the greater insanity is to keep doing what hasn't been working and thinking if you do more of it, it will work.
Yes.
It's exactly what Gabe was describing in the thinking. And what once I feel that once I set that thing off, Delmar, in my thinking, why? I need to get to the bottom of it. You know what the bottom of it is? A grave. And we'll get there. Don't worry about it. We'll get there. But in the meantime, what's interesting about truth and reality is that it's superficial, it's accessible, it's in reach, it's always where we are. And if we're willing to deny it in the name of thinking reason's going to conclude something so beneficial that denying reality and truth, which is always evident, even the Constitution says it's self-evident, inalienable truths, it refers to things that cannot be escaped, things that are inherent to existence. If I'm willing to dismiss it in the name of fear, trying to get to a point, what are the chances the conclusion of that thought is going to be anything other than polluted, contaminant, and abrasive in some way? And useless. We haven't been honest collectively because we haven't been honest individually. And if I have any point in being in this universe, it would certainly begin to consider things in universal terms rather than in municipal terms. Just the street I live on, the building I live in, the people I happen to know as names and bodies that are close to me. It might be worth considering things on an absolute universal term and say, wow, how could we be apart from something that we're absolutely a part of? How is it even possible? It isn't, but we can think it is, and that's the insanity of it. And we can think it is because we're thinking thoughts that are alone because they have no basis, and then feel alone. And rather than accept what we're doing to cause that, think that we're disconnected from the universe. It's a pretty big leap we're willing to take in relation to our justification, rather than a simple actually acknowledgement, oh, this just happens to be something I'm thinking right now, right now. Never anywhere else. It never happened someplace else. And it's the cause that I blame that's somewhere else. You know, when you mention the story being told, Delmar, we're always telling stories about things not happening. And the thing that's happening in the present is we're telling a story about what's not happening. Why aren't we talking about what's happening? If it's principled and if it's connected to everything, there is no story and a narrative about what's happening. And yet we do not have very good experience at actually just addressing it in ways that we can be clear and speak in terms that people say, oh, of course, of course, of course. I've known that. I just haven't ever put words to it. I've been so busy in this narrative of insanity I've been creating. I've never bothered to say, oh, I know the difference between peace and calamity. I know the difference between conflict and serenity. I know when I set off on these tirades, I can feel the anxiety, the stress.
You said something months ago, maybe, where it was like when someone dies or ODs or suicide, the wrong person dies. And I think about that vividly because back when I was, partying heavily, I will say, I would go to sleep just thinking of dying. Like that was literally the thoughts that would go through my head, because come to realize later after we've talked a few times, that version of me, I wanted to die. Like that ego, that idea, the things, the activity that I was doing, the lifestyle I was living, I wanted to die. And so when I heard of the two friends like I said, acquaintances that passed, I just right away thought, well, which version died? Because I was that version. I remember that version, and I didn't want to continue that version. Luckily for me, I'm in a position where I'm able to continue and still be here, and I don't have those thoughts anymore, but I'm also not doing those actions anymore that was, surprisingly enough, causing those thoughts. Do they happen? Do they come across my mind? Of course, but my thoughts now are how to continue to live for as long as I can. And the only reason I have a little bit of a struggle with the concept of death is I wasn't exposed to that at a young age. My mom hid that from me for as long as she could. Not really sure why, but I think she was uncomfortable with the idea of it.
Well, if the source of our existence is infinite, there is no death in that, and there is no limit in that. And there is no end to that because there is no beginning to it. It's just an absolute present state of being. And as we get more comfortable with that, my sense is we're not afraid of dying. We're afraid of letting go of the thoughts of who we think we are, because all of those thoughts are based on self-induced fear, self-induced anxiety, self-induced stress. And the self that induces them is the idea we have about who we think we are as the self that we are. And it isn't true. And I know I've shared before that when that hit me one morning at 5:30, when I was writing in a coffee shop early in the morning, when my head was clear, and I thought, I'm writing about an ego that doesn't even exist. Why am I giving this thing so much credit to even spend time trying to describe it? I'm describing stories. And I had a panic attack. All the fear that had been induced by keeping that thought in check and thinking those thoughts were true and thinking who I was what I thought, bam, released all that tension in my body, and my whole body went gray. I thought I was dying. And in fact, that's a good example of that death of that idea, and how powerful the impact on our body is to have ideas actually cause the heart attacks and the inability of the body to sustain the weight of the conflict we create. They're not accidents. They're consequences of what we're thinking and how we're thinking. And our ability to live longer, ironically, does not come from being more worried about what's happening and more stressed over what's happening. It actually kills us sooner in the name of trying to protect us. And that's addiction, getting the exact consequence that you're claiming to avoid as a result of what you're doing. So the reason I said that the wrong person dies is generally people who kill themselves are trying to kill the thoughts about what they think. And they're saying, I've had enough. And yet what they've been feeding themselves is more and more and more of the same. That's never enough. And that disconnect is infuriating when it's all you're thinking about. And the more time you spend thinking about it, the closer you're going to get to that point where you think the best thing you can do is eliminate it. But ironically, the thought to stop and just let it go never seems to occur, because the insanity thinks the life of that thing depends on continuing to maintain it manically in obsessive thinking. And the idea of actually letting that go and stopping it is the idea of what suicide is, what addiction is.
Never contemplated stopping that thought.
Yeah. So the ultimate recognition that delusion really hasn't ever been anything other than my imagination thinking imagination is true, all of a sudden sort of pops the bubble in beginning to see that when I have those conflicts, when getting back to your earlier point, Michael, when I asked what's the difference is, getting back to those conflicts, beginning to see them as they are, even if they're disturbed and they're insane and they're totally screwed up, there's great peace in looking at it accurately and saying, oh, that's what I'm actually doing right now. And if I'm doing it, I don't have to understand it, because if I try to reason with insanity, I'm insane trying to make reason with it. I'm looking for an answer by questioning insanity. Who's insane now? Once again, I'm repeating the same thing. I'm becoming insane thinking I'll get good reason from insanity. And what's the reason that I'm going to get? Nothing more than helps perpetuate the unreasonable nature of the thinking I'm doing that's insane. So to ask why is to ask, it's like saying to an insane person, why are you crazy? And they're going to say, I'm not crazy. You're crazy to think I'm crazy.
Yeah,
and I would say they're right.
I used to always wonder that, I used to want to ask why, and I find myself, I have not asked why when someone passes in a very long time, because I don't know. I used to ask it. Why? What happened? What caused it? Like, as if that story, or if that tidbit of information would change. Now I know. Okay, well, yeah, you shouldn't have crossed the street. It's like, well, that was
it doesn't prevent us from wondering.
Why.
It doesn't prevent us from wondering or asking why. The point is that when we think why is going to lead to the quintessential answer, and we're missing what we're doing, we're missing the answer in having what we're doing being what we're doing to start with, to even have a question to ask.
Yeah, and that was it. I thought the why was going to give me an answer.
Yes, of course. But it's, to be asking insanity to give you an answer is insane. And what's the answer going to be but continue to perpetuate the problem? And I don't speak well to all of these points. I just talk a lot about it. That's all. Because it seems to me that it isn't necessary to sort it all out and have it in some scientific order, to mention things that if everybody already knows in some way, even if they don't think they do, if they're aware of it, the spark that reignites that awareness doesn't take a lot. It just takes a little. And if we do a little bit of the conversation actively engaging around it, it may give an impression that would otherwise be depressing, meaning that the awareness starts to actually eliminate some of the thinking and sort of brings laughter to the process rather than taking this imposition of thought so seriously as to make believe that it's actually so true. There's nothing we can do about it. No, well, I'm just going to go, do something that's destructive. No compulsion is healthy, ever. None. Nor are impulses. Impulses generally are trying to cover something up. Same with reactions. See you, Ty. Drive safely.
Thanks.
Welcome, Austin.
Hey, good morning. What are you guys talking about?
You. We were just talking about the concession of letting what is happening happen rather than always ask why, because to ask if what's happening is insane and we keep asking why, we're asking insanity to give us a reasonable answer. And that's just more insanity. And so we stay in the loop of continuing to think about the thinking that has no basis and thinking someday if we think more about it, it'll be better. And starting just to say that the introduction was that this isn't about asking why, it's about conceding that. And what is that? Whatever we're doing, whatever's happening is happening. However it's happening right now, it's happening for everybody. While it may appear differently, the simultaneous nature of everything is happening. And that changes the discussion a little bit.
I think if I can find out the why, it might help me be better prepared for when it happens again to protect myself.
Yeah. And yet, if the question is being asked of insanity, all you're doing is getting information that's unreliable, and you're going to use it again and again and again and again and again, just perpetuate the same thing. So what's reliable for sure is that what's happening is happening right now.
Well, the why, like, what's the example? Like, can you give an example? Like, why me? Like, is there a situation that happened?
I would say it applies to all situations. I mean, if there's any essence to this conversation, it would be principled enough to be able to apply to all the problems rather than a problem, because all the problems would be effectively the same problem, just masquerading as distinguished by the stories we tell about them, the places and the people and the things involved, rather than notice.
Once we stop describing stories, though, because that goes in our head and to other people, there's an enormous amount of room.
Well, in an infinite space, there's not even an enormous amount of room. It's just, it doesn't even, it can't even be quantified. I mean, you're starting to talk about something. And look, this can sound insane to talk about because reason has been worshipped as the sole source of our existence. But would it be reasonable to a person that relies only on reason not to contemplate or wonder if something infinite exists, and then in wondering about that infinite thing, begin to realize that reason would be useless in trying to determine it? I mean, that's the reasonable question and the reasonable answer, not I rely only on reason and it's impossible that anything beyond reason exists. That's admitting that reason has unreasonable limits or is limited unreasonably, not to even consider what infinite means. And it has been in mathematics, as I said earlier, but Austin's here for, recently. In mathematics, when it was applied, calculus was created and all those choppy lines smoothed out. They were graceful. Why would that be if it wasn't a recognition and a reflection of grace and something that's natural that we share, not something we have to earn and only get when we get what we want? We think we get what we want and think that somehow a creator is shining on us while not shining on others. If what's infinite is indivisible, it's completely impossible to be any more or less for everyone and everything. And if it's the basis of our existence and we consider that rather than believe in it and absolutely claim that it's true and start fighting over it, which humans have done through history, to simply concede that if it is, which also means if it isn't, it isn't. But I would say if you apply principles in math, math works. And if you don't apply principles in math, they don't work. So part of this conversation is beginning to see that how we apply our thoughts creates our experience. And if our experience seems condemned, there's a good chance it's our thinking that's causing that, nothing else. Not to say there aren't outside threats, but largely speaking, most people are not condemned by outside threats very often and are terminally condemned by interior threats that are constantly happening. And very often outside threats are made greater threats by the thinking we're doing about the threat. It could be small and we turn it into a big one to prove that we know what's a real threat, what isn't.
The term "is what it is till it ain't" really doesn't exist.
Unless you think what is and it ain't.
There you go.
Again, we have the capacity in thought to make believe what we think is true. And that, when it isn't true, is what denial amounts to. This idea that we can actually fight for a thought to be real is the idea that reality requires a fight, which it wouldn't and doesn't. Reality is just real. It's just everything that is. It isn't even everything. It's nothing. It's something that can't be quantified in the words we use. But we can reference it. We can point to it. We can suggest that it exists. We can suggest that something unfathomable and almost unconscionable exists, and yet it must be a knowing conscious that's just hard to.
Like these new photos from the web camera, NASA camera.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did
I
you
heard about
also
that this morning?
Did you read also that photo that includes all those thousands or hundreds of galaxies is equal to a grain of sand held at arm's length of the universe?
No.
That capture of that photo is equal. If you held a grain of sand at your arm's length, it's that much of the universe that photo captured. So again, we have these visible, quantifiable things that we find impossible or hard to even quantify because they seem so magnificent and huge, and yet we think of them as something unique to out there and something a telescope has to tell us about, when I assure you they've been there the whole time we've been and we are, based on what that is. We can't be something separate from that. We're part of it.
And as small as they can measure in the infinite zero, there's still so much movement.
Yeah. Well, it's like trying to cut one in half. You can go forever, and all that happens is the fraction gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And what's interesting in mathematics too, we always talk about forever. A number that doesn't have an end is called an irrational number.
Yeah. That makes no sense.
And yet we always talk about forever. And my sense is there is no forever if there's an ever-present presence. It's always present in the now. It's not something to look forward to in some forever that you never get to, because if you waited forever, you'd still have forever to wait. That is torture. That's a torture chamber. I get the concept, but I believe it's a misspeaking to the actuality of what we're witnessing and experiencing. But people say forever never comes, which is, sort of torture. But we can think it will. Doesn't mean we're condemned by thinking it will when we start just saying, oh, it's just a thought. The stopping of it, MK, isn't necessary to stop it to have the impact of it have no impact. by saying, oh, I'm doing it again. It's just a thought I'm having. When you allow what things are to be as they are, there's no fight in it. There's no opposition. There's no stress. There's no pressure. There's no resistance. There's no insistence. There's no persistence. It just is what it is, period.
Looks like we'll be going like hell today. Change this.
And I would suggest, as has been brought up many times before, that what we're generally struggling with is what we don't think we're thinking. We get fixated on what we're thinking so much and spend so much time trying to sort out the thinking we're doing, we don't even notice that really what's motivating us are thoughts we don't even think we're having, which again is another source of denial. And the idea that something that we can't think about or that aren't thinking about doesn't exist. And my experience was when I started seeing that my subconscious was filled with all the ideas I wanted to be irresponsible for, and I started realizing that and accepting and conceding that, all of a sudden, a lot of those thoughts that I thought were hidden started to make themselves very clear and apparent, which allowed me to be able to say, oh, that's interesting. I would think that. That's an interesting thought. And all of a sudden, this stuff started to vanish.
It's a surprise. This is what I'm talking about. It's all a big surprise. It's all by accident.
It seems like it, but the present has always been open. It didn't even have a bow on it.
Damn.
So humans haven't been good at this discussion, though they have broached it through history. Even our what was it? In the announcement this week, I found that quote. Let me see if I can find it really quick. By a guy named Benjamin Caceres. He was born in 1873. He said, "My studies in speculative philosophy, metaphysics, and science are all summed up in the image of a mouse called man, running in and out of every hole in the cosmos, hunting for the absolute cheese." So these things have been talked about and written about and referenced. And my experience is they haven't been incorporated very well into everyday experience. For the average person, we've relied on people who are too well educated and not notice that we actually all have the absolute capacity to recognize exactly what's happening, because even our fight against it is an admission of it. Even the conflicts we create is a concession of it. Morning, Philip.
Morning, Jack.
The idea we can escape, it's funny that we can think we could be trapped and apart from it and not notice that we couldn't be apart from something we're not a part of. The conclusions, when you actually look at them accurately, are insane. They just make no sense. It's like the ego promising us everything, when in fact the promise of a lie is nothing. So to think who I am is ever going to give me what I want is to constantly think that nothing is my goal. It's literally it's a death wish. And what do I wish the death of? The thoughts I have in relation to the thing I think I am, rather than simply seeing that those thoughts are creating so much anxiety that it's actually causing that ball of mucus, acidic mucus I had in my stomach. I'll bet if it stayed there another 20 years or so, would have caused some havoc in my stomach and the rest of my body. My sense is that healing is not a miracle, it's natural, and that disease is unnatural, and yet we consider it today to be very natural and common.
I can't get enough of the mucus analogy. More mucus throwing up.
I think I said that before the women were in the group.
More mucus, throw up, less everything else.
Like a hairball.
Yeah.
Well, I had said, Jackie, that I'd always had, even as a kid, this sort of gnawing nausea in my stomach, nervousness.
Ah,
And at
me
some point,
too.
probably 10 or 15 years ago, I just vomited, and this ball of acidic mucus came out of my stomach that was probably 4 inches across, 5 inches.
Gross. Come on. You should have saved it.
Well, clearly
I want to see it.
that might have been overkill.
That would be awesome,
But
Jar.
the experience was that feeling I'd had for so long went away. And I realized that the feeling was a consequence of thoughts that had stressed my body and caused this condition. And as
Right, a lot of it is caring what other people think.
well, it's really what I think they're thinking that's causing the problem.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? You're recording, right?
Yeah.
I'm the opposite, Anthony. I'm like, I want to be able to hear my question again. So is it okay for me to ask the question now?
Of course, always.
Okay. Yay, everybody. Okay. So I was filmed doing stand-up at the end of the quarantine, and the film, not just me, Margaret Cho and some other people, and they filmed it, and it's going to be at the DGA today for Outfest. And whenever I have these type of things, I get so anxious and I don't enjoy myself because I think I'm doing everything wrong. And also, another big thing is I was hired as a queer comic, but I'm dating a man right now. And
Jackie, that can't matter.
come on, no, thank you for thinking it doesn't matter. And
But actually, Jackie, that is queer.
Two queers make it right.
Just say the guy you're dating. Just say the guy you're dating is gay.
I mean, he is more feminine than me.
I'd be worried about that woke mob. Woke mob will come get you.
Yeah.
Can you put him in the wedding dress for the event?
Really good idea. Super good idea. It would fit him.
So can we look at this?
Marvelous.
Yeah, it would look really good.
So Jackie, when you say that you feel nervous and all that, you feel you're wrong,
Oh.
right?
Oh, okay. So
Didn't
yeah,
you-
there is definitely a part of me that's like, that likes me better when I'm with women.
No, what I was saying is earlier in your conversation, you said, I go into these things never feeling
Oh,
good, and I'm anxious, and I feel wrong.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's start
Uh-huh.
there.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's just say that the admissions you make are accurate.
Okay.
So the anxiety you're feeling is based on thinking that's wrong.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
So to look any further than what's happening is to make believe that somehow or another confronting insanity. You're coming in a little bit late, but if we're confronting something that's delusional and we're asking delusion to answer our question,
Ooh, yeah.
who's crazy?
Me. Wait,
Well,
wait.
and-
What? I got one more thing.
Go.
The producers of it, I really want them to produce my next special.
Right. And they might not.
They might not
Right.
if I'm with a guy.
Well, they might not
But-
for any number of reasons.
You know what it is? I hate disappointing people, and I feel like they'll be disappointed. And I feel like if I'm bringing a guy, like they really want me to be with a woman at this thing. I feel like I'm not doing what I was hired to do.
Oh, that's a thing. I get that.
Yeah. And it's
again,
an out festival. It's not
you-
like it's an
you-
out festival and it's a out.
You're looping around on trying to resolve it rather than just simply have it.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the beginning of this today, Jackie, was one of the first things I said. Let me actually go back to, I have a little outline. We're not here to seek anything since what is not lost cannot be found. But prior to that, this isn't a search for why, but a concession that. Follow that?
Yeah.
So if we start letting what's happening be what's happening right now, which is really what this conversation is about, it's about talking in terms of what's actually happening here, then all the other surmising we have about what could be, what should be, what might be, what could have been, what, all that stuff goes away. Because we actually begin to actually look at, oh, well, this is happening. What am I feeling? I'm wrong. Why would that be? Let's say we're right about feeling wrong. It's probably a good, accurate assessment of thinking that's wrong. You can conclude those things and create a stable basis for questions if you want to keep looking and seeking. But intuition will generally answer in a much broader, absolute knowing way than the reasoning that we use to constantly go back to and think that we're going to come up with it, because the variables in what you're trying to conclude are endless.
Yeah.
That's true.
They are.
So we can
Thank you.
manage the problem. And what do we do? What's good management? Maintenance. What's good maintenance? Management. What happens? The problem just continues because we think we got it under control when in fact it has no basis other than what we think. Why not just say, look, if I want to suffer the consequences I'm suffering right now, I can pick up this thought anytime I want.
Oh
I don't need to
God.
I don't need to maintain it to solve it
God.
and then live with it and wonder why I feel condemned by it.
All right. Ding, 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 ding.
Serve you well, the infinite amount of possibilities of the truth of it is that somebody in there that has the power might think that it's awesome. Not that you should be judged on who you're with, but
There's no way that would happen.
you
The
know,
producers wouldn't think that, but the audience might be like, oh wow, because
If we are
Yeah.
rationalizing it, all we're doing is maintaining
Yeah,
questions
right.
never answered. All we're doing. We're
Yeah.
actually asking not to answer the question we claim to be asking by constantly coming up with new ways to see it. And then notice that those new ways always seem to change because what we thought was the most incredible, expansive thought all of a sudden gets replaced by another incredible it just goes, this is what obsessive thinking is. It isn't something we can't do. It's something we're very capable of doing, but we set it off in directions that it will not stop as long as we maintain it. And our maintenance of it is generally driven by this question, why?
Mm.
And we're missing the fact that if we're not even willing to have that, like what's happening as what's happening, how are we possibly even capable? If that's like saying I have no experience with calculus, but why can't I solve the problem?
Yeah.
It's crazy. We wouldn't do that in an academic setting, and yet in life we could do it almost constantly when it comes to obsessive thinking.
All day, every day.
do you feel like a fraud?
Ooh la la la. Yeah. Yep.
Why?
Because
No, I'm kidding.
yeah. No. I'm a fraud. You know what I'm not concentrating on though? I'm not concentrating on the best thing in the world, my stand-up. Like
Jackie,
I'm getting
you're doing what you're doing, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So if you can know that you're doing what you're doing, you have a basis now to begin thinking about what you want to be doing with a lot more clarity than thinking you don't understand what you're doing and why you're doing it, and then thinking that that thinking is going to get you to focus on the stand-up comedy so beautifully, and you keep wondering why you can't seem to focus.
Yeah.
So the basis of existence is already in perfect order right now.
Okay.
Always
Yes,
is.
perfect. Perfect.
And how I or you or we choose to see it is a choice. And if the way I choose to see it is a way that it isn't happening, I am asking for the conversation to go in a direction that's impossible to ever end. And feel all of those things that you're describing, feeling wrong, feeling like a fraud, all that stuff. It is fraudulent to think what you're thinking is true and real when it's simply an imposition of thought to make believe that simply imagining something all of a sudden turns it into reality. If reality is real, and it's all that is, it does not need any thinking about it to be any more or less than what it can be. And
Ooh
what it
la
is.
la, that's gold. That's a nugget.
But I still wouldn't be too fascinated with Matt in front of the girls. Just be neutral.
Yeah.
Let the
Yeah.
scheming begin.
I know.
So it's just
Let the scheme.
noticing.
I'm gonna make him pretend that he's with my gay guy friend.
If you are as you are, the freedom to do what you do will be clear, and the right to do what you do will be clear, and it will not be condemned by what you think other people may be thinking, and is always condemned only by what you think they're thinking.
Wait a minute, who's Claire?
Clear.
Oh.
Sorry, I was unclear. I was, clarification. You remember her.
What about clearance? Clearance is at every store. All right, not so funny. Clarence? Okay.
Yeah, you
Okay.
can't just make humor all the time to get rid of the problems, Jackie.
Oh my God, Anthony. You're so right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
can.
Yes, you can. I can't wait to close the.
Jackie, I used to pretend I was a transvestite when I bartended at Hamburger Mary's on Front Street in Lahaina in the 80s. And I don't feel bad about it.
I think that's amazing.
I made great tips.
That's
My name was
amazing.
Juan.
She means people said your mascara is bleeding.
Maybe I'll keep calling Matt they. This is Matt. They want to let you know.
So as we are here, before we start to derail the train and avoid what's going on,
Awesome.
just notice
Oh, that's amazing, honey. Just one more. No.
notice how we're dealing with what's
The
happening.
greeny one, the dark green.
And the tendency to run off in other directions, and the tendency to think of it in other ways, and the tendency to think it needs a resolution. And in fact, those resolutions in addiction, it's like drinking another drink for an alcoholic. That isn't a resolution. It just seems like one. It looks like one. It appears to be one, like a ghost appears. It isn't one, but is thought to be one. So what does it mean? As soon as it's done, the next one is coming. The next one is coming. The next one is coming. It's the same thing with the thinking. Perpetually feeds itself more and more lack of nourishment and wonders why it needs more food.
Thank you. Heaven must be missing an angel.
So you're
being
happy?
here,
You're happy with those answers, Jackie? That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Oh, that's lovely. What are you going to wear tonight?
Gorgeous. I have a couple dress options, but I might
A tux?
what?
A tuxedo?
Yeah, right. Should I? Shall I dress like a man? No, some dresses and but I'm also waiting for Crossroads to open to look for more dresses. So there's that.
so back to the conversation on the mental obsession.
Can I do one more mental obsession? Ooh, Jana will be good at this.
Well, Jackie, let's see if
Okay.
let's see if maybe it's always the same thing.
Okay, you're right. Okay.
Well, no, it's not a claim to rightness. It's just a chance to look at it and start to notice that if there is an underlying issue that constantly develops new problems, to think if we manage them, we'll get it done, and don't notice that it's like the bicycle tire, and thinking that the leaky bicycle tire, what it needs is constantly to be refilled with air rather than have the leak fixed. And I would suggest and aim toward, in this conversation, starting to see that if we're looking at it from a principled absolute basis, that would be to replace the tire and stop the leak rather than have something constantly need a new defensive, rationalized idea and answer. Because those answers are never answered. They're never conclusive. They're constantly going to beg for more and more and more and more because they aren't actually answers to the problem. They're answers to the circumstances that are always going to change regardless of what we make believe they are right now. Always.
And the rationalization we try to get from our co-conspirators.
Well, we make them co-conspirators to make believe that somehow it's not just us. And then we say, well, I'm better than they are.
Yes.
Which think of how sick that is, that we think we're only
That's so
better when people are worse.
Exactly.
That's pretty
I'm fucked
demented.
up, but that guy's really jacked.
Yeah. So talking about this openly can lead to a lot of silence. And I suspect that includes a sort of contemplation of what's actually going on, because to actually begin to witness what's happening rather than what we're always thinking about that's happening. And I would suggest, if you look at your experience, that most of what you're thinking about that's happening isn't actually happening. It's stories and memories you're having about times that if we're different, your present would be different. But in fact, the present is always the same because it's exactly as it is. And it's delusional to make believe that somehow you can go back in time and change something that's already done and over. And there is no time to go back into, since it's always present, it's always new, it's always happening, it's always here. Those time and space, or time is just basically a concept of thought. The accumulation of everything that's ever happened is right here with us now. Everything that has ever happened has impacted everything that has ever happened. And it's here now with us. And settling that score means not having to achieve anything to let it be. It isn't vengeance. It isn't spite. It isn't contempt. It's just a simple concession. That it's settled. It's done. It's stable. It's peaceful. It's here. It's present. And to look at the experiences I have as consequences of what I'm doing in thought at least begins to give me credit that is due, rather than make believe the undue credit I blame and shame and fault others for doing is somehow going to save me one day, when in fact I'm using all those points to try to excuse my involvement. Getting back to Jana's point about the responsibility. Responsibility isn't something we take, but when you begin to look at it as something that we naturally are, it's not something we have, it's something we are. It makes the irresponsible thoughts we have become something we're doing rather than something we are. So we can't be condemned by something we're doing, because we can always stop doing it and we can always discontinue doing it. But this isn't also about not doing it. It's about seeing that we can always do it regardless of whether we begin or stop. And recovery is about seeing that neutrality is the potential to do it or not do it. Any of us who are sober in this conversation, who don't drink or do drugs or don't overeat or don't gamble or don't have risky sex or excessive sex or spend money unnecessarily or debt and create fiscal irresponsibility, recognize that the freedom isn't in never doing it again. The freedom is in recognizing that we're always capable of doing it. But when we restore our vision to that perspective, it makes no sense to do the thing that's wrong. And that's recovery. Recovery isn't never thinking about the thing again. It's never stopping the thing forever and saying you're never going to do it. That's just a new fight, because the chances are you'll end up doing it to prove that the fight is exactly what it is, which is wrong. But to see it as something that's always possible makes the possibility of not doing it easy, because it's sort of like putting your hand in fire. If you know it's going to burn, chances are you're not going to do it again. We think in delusion that we're escaping it while we're actually putting our hand in the flame, wondering why we feel burned all the time and wrong all the time. Because we're trying to excuse it. We're trying to deny our involvement, our culpability. We create conspirators to say, well, we either blame everybody for what we're feeling and then use everybody to justify what we're doing because they do it too. Like there's no limit to the capacity we have to make believe that how we think about things creates reality and truth. And especially in denial and delusion, it's absurd when you actually start looking at it accurately and saying, that makes no sense. And so acting on it makes no sense, rather than thinking the only thing you can do is the one thing you shouldn't do. And that's really what addiction is thinking there's only one option. And the option of options, the option of choice, is that there's always the option not to choose, always. To look at things principally is to start to express the nature of things as it is, rather than as we think it is. And to MK's point earlier, the difference is we know reactively what's happening inside of. If we just start listening to the words we use in relation to what's happening and start to take for granted that those words are accurate assessments, not of the world around us, not that what's wrong with the DGA or the comedy club or the people in it, but what's wrong with our thinking when we feel wrong. It doesn't create a short circuit. It creates an immediate circuit that's accurate and dispels the need to continue to do it. There's no fight in it. There's no resistance in it. There's no need to persist in the defense of it, because it's simply acknowledging what's happening is happening. And there's nothing that needs to be done about that. Because I will assure you that while we thought things weren't happening, they were happening exactly as they were happening the whole time. Delusion has never been true, except to the thought it was true. That's what's delusional.
Hey, what about Jackie's other thing?
You want to talk about that, Jackie?
Jack,
Philip.
I have something, unless Jackie wants to go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi. No, let Philip go.
Go, Phil.
Two things. So I've been after 2.5 years, I finally got coronavirus. So that's yeah. So that's not been fun this week, but I'm getting better. Taking the antiviral, and I've had 4 shots of Moderna, so I'm pretty armed. But yeah, for me, it's pretty scary because it's my lungs. I always get, because I had pneumonia as a kid, so I always get afraid when I feel like more mucus or something like that. But anyway, make a long story short, God, I just lost it. What was it?
It's getting longer.
No, it's not getting long. So I'm supposed to move back up to LA this week. I was supposed to be Friday, Thursday and Friday. I was going to do the move. Now it's today and tomorrow. So, it's funny, as you guys were talking, I was just thinking, yeah, this sucks. I should have been able to get like breakfast today somewhere in the area where I want it, blah, blah, blah. You know what? I totally forgot what I was what it was I wanted to talk, what I was had a question about. So
it's actually a good sign, Philip.
Yeah, this meeting is working. Your problem just disappeared, vanished.
No, I mean, in a way, my sense is I've had that experience many times when I'm ready to launch in a direction and all of a sudden it evaporates. It is an indication that maybe the critical nature of what you've been carrying to think you're going to resolve was resolved. It was, it's not quite as critical. And I know that, listen, I'm not diminishing any of the issues you have that you're dealing with. I don't want to take them away. I want them to be what they are. And since they are what they are, if we talk about them in those terms, very often they're not as compelling as they might otherwise seem.
Well, actually, it's coming back to me. What I wanted to say was, it gets me very, I don't know, scared and immortality and all that stuff. So I started looking at near-death experiences.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I forget the website, but there's a collection.
This is one of them.
There's a collection of it, of all these near-death experiences. And I thought it was funny that all of them usually talked about feeling some kind of grand happiness and like lightness,
Yes.
then like floating above their body and going someplace and then coming back
Yes.
into the body. Which
What
for
did they
me,
describe when they came back?
huh?
What did they describe when they came back to their body?
Well, they described having this like ultimate happiness and lightness and feeling completely free of pain, almost like an ecstasy. And then coming back to the body, they could almost see the body as a vehicle. A lot of them talked about how they see the body as a vehicle, them as not the body.
Yeah.
For me, what the epiphany was, I was like, well, if we're all going to end up happy and light in the end, no matter what happens, what's the point of all this pressure and stressing and all the other stuff? But at the same time, I've noticed my head during this time going to the other place of me seeing like, wow, switching to a new career. What have I done wrong with the acting stuff that I'm still pursuing, but not giving up. I have to, pursue something else at the same time. All the blame and, what did I do wrong? Blah, 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 all that stuff. But it's interesting to see where we'll probably end up. And then two, how the obsessive mind will want to immediately, as soon as it gets an opportunity or we're unconscious or even waking up this morning, like, my lungs felt a little like I couldn't breathe. And I've been dealing with panic attacks. Anyway, my oxygen level's fine. I got water. I was just dehydrated a little bit and I'm better now, but it's just interesting to see how like the pool from where we'll end up into where the mind will always try to go to catastrophize.
Well, the mind doesn't do it. You allow it and encourage it so that you can excuse what's happening by blaming your mind, as though it's something that's automatic. It's automatic to the degree that when you subject, like if you subject your hand to boiling water, it's pretty automatic that you're going to feel it, right? So by subjecting your brain to that, the cunning, baffling nature of this illness is thinking that we're not doing what we're doing, and all of a sudden the mind is doing it, and my brain is doing it, my ego is doing it. I'm being attacked by outside forces that I'm actually creating to justify I'm not doing it. So what do? Continue to do it, thinking it isn't me. I'm just stuck in this vortex. And isn't it interesting that people seem to only have those experiences of clarity when they have near-death experiences? What is it we're doing about life that has us feel so distant from death when it's possible any moment of any day? And yet it seems like we only allow ourselves the experience of that awareness when we're near death. That's interesting. How buried are we? How insulated are we? How numb are we to what is actually happening for us to think that we need to almost be dead to actually wake up and say, oh, there's actually something that's profound going on in front of us. And that show that I mentioned last year, I think it was on Netflix, that was called Life After Death, I think. A lot of those people, once they got back into their bodies after having that enormous clarity, certainly had a better awareness, but they also suffered and struggled with their bodily experience. Sort of like they returned to that state the body is capable of producing because they were utilizing it, that vehicle they had, in the same way they used to, because it seemed like the only way to do it.
Have you,
Follow that?
speaking of things on Netflix, have you seen that new one, Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind?
No.
So he wrote a book, and I never read the book, but I wanted to. And he actually turned it into a mini series on Netflix. In his first episode, he was talking about LSD, microdosing LSD. And I guess he mentioned that, Bill Wilson, that was one of the things that helped him get sober. Yeah. Was he had, or at least that's the story they're telling, is that he had microdosed or he had done some sort of therapy session. Because back in the 50s and 60s, they were doing really thorough clinical work before it was deemed, they get into all this, but Bill Wilson, that was one of the things he tried, and it allowed him to really think outside of what his thoughts were. I mean, you probably have more insight on that than I do, but
He did it. He was somewhere in his 15 to 20 years, but at the time it was being investigated as that he was trying to figure out. Bill Wilson struggled with depression. Exactly what we're talking about. He struggled with the mental obsession. He was free from alcohol, but he struggled with the mental problems. He had depression a lot. And my sense is he introduced a concept that allowed us to recover from symptoms, but the underlying issue of the disease wasn't looked at as clearly as it has been evolved to be looked at today. And I would hope that we're doing together, hope in the sense of at least having a goal that we can look toward and do our best to sort of uncover. But he did it 15 years or more into sobriety and then realized that he didn't want to use chemicals and ended up finding niacin, B3.
Yes.
And started using niacin to give his body a bit of relief that it wasn't otherwise getting. And he felt that was a cure. And then he realized once again, he's getting addicted to these ideas of, you know, and suffered with depression and emotional turmoil. So he maintained his sobriety, but clearly admitted that he felt like he was the odd man out when it came to AA because he couldn't actually go to a meeting. He was the founder. He wasn't somebody who was there. He was not anonymous. He did not
That's
have
ironic.
the luxury. Yeah, exactly, Anthony. He didn't have the luxury of the anonymity where he could just be a person who wanted to be with other people. He was always the founding father and and he did everything he could to divest himself of that role, but it never really happened.
It's the same thing with Jerry Garcia. He never got to enjoy the whole thing because he was ahead of it.
Because he was on the stage all the time.
And then he died of a heroin addiction, where all the other band members could be more anonymous in the world.
Yeah.
Anthony's hands up.
Anthony, what's up?
Hey, three things I wanted to say. One is the meeting didn't, in my opinion, get good until Jackie and Phil brought up real examples. If we're just talking hypothetically, it's just too much. But it was great when Phil brought up an example, and then we kind of just left it. I have codependency because I'm like, damn, we just left this guy. He admitted to, that was the best part. He's like, I feel scared. What did I do wrong? Did I choose the wrong profession? What could I have done? I could totally relate to that. And that's what step
Anthony,
could you work around that?
You think reality and truth are hypothetical.
No, I like the reality. I don't like that.
No, but you call stories reality and truth.
So that's why
you don't see that they were talking hypothetically though, because none of the things they were talking about happened.
No, but Phil was saying that he's got to move. He doesn't feel well. He's got
None of
this
it
shit. He
happened.
wanted to get some breakfast. That's the reality.
But it didn't happen. No, that's not a reality. It didn't
That's his
happen.
experience. It's not reality's reality, and it's something we all share. It's not a story we tell about our experience.
And what step could he work around this? He's saying he's in fear. Like, what do you tell him as far as an AA step to work around that?
Well,
my life is unmanageable, or what
Anthony,
step?
why don't we ask you that question?
Well, I don't want to monopolize. I'm trying not to monopolize. That's why I raised my hand.
You're not monopolizing by talking about what's happening. That's what we're here to do.
I find it interesting that the two people that brought up stories are actors of the group that have to perform for a living. They chose this field because they're good looking, that they want to be successful in this. As time goes on, they're getting older, they're getting a little more, things are changing. That's the reality part I like.
Did Jackie and Philip, do you think how he just assessed your situation, that's accurate?
No, like neither of us said that whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly.
And Anthony stated an opinion, not a fact. I was really enjoying the meeting before I spoke.
So
I had a lot of ahas before.
But
I still love you though, Anthony.
I really wanted to include you. I really thought it was Philip's story. He really got real, where he said he's scared and he doesn't know if he chose the right profession and he's wondering what he did wrong. That's the part I can relate to.
Yeah, of course, because the whole concept of the reality being real, regardless of your thinking, you don't think is possible. So, Anthony, the question is, if there's an underlying issue that causes all of those stories and all those experiences, and we can deal with the underlying issue, why are we looking at the individual? That's like plucking a hair out of my head when I want to get my hair cut and just cutting one at a time. I don't have any hair, but
Yeah, because there are
concept.
solutions. Like I was thinking, if Philip lived near us, we'd all say, "Hey, we could help you move. Let's do this together. It's a teamwork." But I don't think that's going to happen, and that's not really what we're looking for—a solution to his problem, in a way.
Well,
and it's
you.
funny that he had the solution. He said everything's peaceful at the end, but I focus on like the immediate problem, and just instead of just saying, "Oh yeah, it's all going to be great in the end," I want to go more into the problem. So I see that as my scenario.
Good. That's very good insight, Anthony.
Yeah.
And we haven't left Philip out of this conversation. He's still part of this conversation.
Well, I don't feel out of it. I mean, honestly, I pose my experience and, was just looking to see if there was any insight. And then I was actually just kind of meditating, listening to other people.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I look at times when I get sick or, there's an old saying in acting, at least for New York theater actors, you give your best performance when you're under the weather or you're sick.
Wow.
because you stop thinking.
Wow.
And you don't have enough energy to do anything but to just do it.
Wow.
So when I got sick, it was interesting to just watch and see things slow down and kind of ask my higher power, what do you want me, like, what do I need to learn from this experience? Or what's your guidance? Like, just.
You came a little late. And again, the early introduction was that we're not here to ask why, we're here to begin to concede that. Meaning that what's happening is happening. And if we can begin to concede that, we're dealing with something that's reliable, and any questions based on that reliable reliance would obviously have more traction than thoughts that are being asked of something that's already in doubt and already unreliable. And it's one of the tricks or traps of addiction to make believe that we're just going to skip over what's happening and get better by doing something else and not notice that we're constantly feeling like we need to get better. We're constantly feeling like we need more. Nobody ever comes to me and says, I want to feel worse and I want to have more negative thoughts. Because that baseline is already built into our experience, given that we've been suffering this addiction to this thinking for generations and generations and generations. And it's come to the point where it seems so common that to talk about it very often, and I've run into this 100 times, is to have people think that I'm absolutely crazy for even discussing something that they can't even begin to comprehend because they're so within the context of their thinking. Thinking is all that's going on, that all they think about is what they think, and they don't think anything's going on beyond that. And I appreciate that when they say that, because I realize they're actually beginning to grasp something that's beyond their comprehension, which is an admission that they notice it, that they're there. So, Philip, to your question, going back, Jackie was here a little earlier than you, if I remember right. Am I right?
I would assume so, yeah.
When you came on a little bit later. She came in with a couple of her things, and what she felt about it was, I felt wrong. I'm going to a show. I always feel wrong. I feel anxious. I don't feel ready. I feel like it undermines my potential to perform, if I got that right, Jackie.
Yeah, the dating a man thing.
Well, just the conflict over having it be what it wasn't originally designed to be, and all of a sudden approaching it from a point of view that doesn't include how she agreed to do what she was doing. But that's just the latest version. I would imagine, and I think Jackie even confirmed this, that she said whenever she goes, she feels something's wrong. There's some doubt. There's always some uncertainty.
Not for regular stand-up, but for I'm going to a premiere of a movie I'm in where I'm doing stand-up. So I get to watch myself do stand-up with an audience, which is kind of amazing. But it's a gay festival. It's a gay short. It's a feature, but I was hired as a gay comedian. So I have anxiety over that I'm
Did they say they
dating a
hired
man.
a comedian, or did they say you were just part of it?
I mean, I was definitely hired as a lesbian comedian, for sure.
Okay.
Listen, Jackie, I'm a lesbian, so the bounds are no longer limited.
Plot twist.
Not Swiss.
Anyway, the point I was
If you
getting
were
back
a
to,
lesbian, you would want a sex change. You
I
would
don't-
want to be a lesbian,
I don't
be a
need,
woman.
why would I want something I have?
But I'm saying a lesbian is a woman that likes other women.
No,
That's
I
all.
get it. I get it. Well, I'm taking the prerogative of liking women.
Yeah.
So the point was earlier that you'd said something about feeling wrong. And Philip seemed to say that same thing when he was talking about, have I had the right career? Now, Philip, you and I have been in that conversation many, many, many times. So whatever the answer is you've been looking for apparently hasn't worked to be still asking the question. And part of the point today, and to Anthony's point also, is that, and Anthony, I think you had a little bit of an awareness of that how you see things is not how things are even seen by the people you think you just witnessed doing the things you think you saw.
Right. Or they're not aware of it. One of the two.
Well, I would say that would be a convenience for you to make believe that somehow they're less qualified to speak to their experience than
All
you
I
are.
was saying is that they were struggling with something. That's really what I was saying, that they were
Okay.
struggling with something in their careers.
Okay. The point is that
He identified with the pain.
the tendency to see what you're thinking is greater than to see what's actually happening.
I'll admit that I was wrong.
No. It's not about being wrong. It's you were right in doing what you did if you just let it be what it is. And that's part of what we started with today. It's just starting to see that it's not about the why as much as it's about the that.
And
It
a little
is.
bit of how. You got to throw in a little how in there.
Well, that's just another question. How is another question. Why is another question. When is another question. Where is another question. What is another question. But that isn't a question. It's just allowing what's happening to be what's happening.
I like that.
And the
I like
basis, the basis of this is intuition is knowledge beyond reason. Okay. So it takes no reason to be knowledgeable. So to think that asking the question why is going to give us the reason that's finally going to conclude the answer, when basically it only ends up leading to more questions. And if you notice, your questions of why tend to just lead to more whys day after day after day after day. That's a choice, and that's an option.
And then I become a wise guy.
Only in the last attempt. But noticing that what's happening is always happening, and it's always happening the way it's happening, no matter what we think, is beginning to embrace what we've never let go of. It's beginning to have in our thinking, it's beginning to introduce our thinking to the stability of our experience rather than ask our thinking to create the stability.
Go ahead.
And start to settle on what is settled if it's stable, and start to think on that basis rather than the basis that's unsettled and unstable and unclear and in doubt and in fear. That's a very different place to begin making decisions. And I would suggest to you, as you do, you'll start thinking things that are conclusive because you're thinking about things as they're happening rather than simply as you think they're happening, where all that need be done with what you think is happening is constantly to be thinking about it as though that's what's happening.
Right. I saw something that said observe more instead of try to figure it out. In other words, just look at what is happening instead of trying to analyze it.
Well, and going one beyond that, Anthony, that what's happening is happening whether we observe it or not. And it's the same thing with this infinite spirit. If there's an infinite source, it is infinite regardless of what we think. And I can believe in it, and it certainly would align then my thinking with it, but it doesn't mean that it depends on my belief. It just means that my experience now is believing in something that's believable, rather than believing in something that's unbelievable and creating a new conflict.
And willing to change that belief, not stuck to that belief.
You don't have to have the belief at all to begin to notice that what's true is true. It doesn't require belief, faith, hope, agreement, trust, none of it. But when your belief is believable and your faith has faithful, not because you demand it be, but because the thing you're thinking of actually is already absolute and true and real and faithful and trustworthy, it doesn't
Right.
require hope.
So what are you trying to say is that what is that?
Yes. So if that's the nature of our existence and we're all witnessing it constantly and we're waiting we're trying to figure out how to get away from it by thinking about things that aren't happening, all we're doing is creating the doubt and the sense of wrong that we're experiencing and thinking that it's somehow the confluence of events that we haven't yet figured out. I can assure you, Jackie and Philip, in all of the conversations you can create around the possibilities and the variabilities that you can imagine, that there are trillions of other options that will occur that you will absolutely be certain of once they occur. And as you get used to being where you are, rather than thinking it isn't where you should be, or how it should be, or when you should be there, or why you should be there, and all those other thoughts, you'll start noticing that what's going to happen is going to happen regardless of what you think. And all of a sudden, in the meantime, you're going to be at ease and at peace to be able to construct anything you want to do really well, because you're not hamstrung with ideas about how to do it right, how to do it well, how to do it because of this, that, and the other thing, how to stop the things that are going on that you can't even imagine. That the chances of you ever concluding how things will be are almost impossible.
But there is that little chance there.
It is so slim that it would make getting the lottery happen 2 or 3 times a day. And that would be.
How about moving next weekend? Is that a possibility, Philip?
Philip's quote, the theater quote, I love that.
I love that too.
When it says you give your best performance when you're under the weather. And the first thing that came to mind is you don't have the resources for your mind to run free. Your body is just in survival mode and it's using all resources to do exactly what it needs to do at that time. That's it.
It's kind of like age. You can't hang on at all.
Yeah.
There's no possibility. It's kind of like, forget it. Why bother?
How about moving next weekend, Philip? What's wrong with that?
My pod's being delivered tomorrow morning.
So if all the possibilities are possible, it's possible that we could imagine things. It's possible that we could imagine things that are impossible as being the only possibility and end up in the confounding nature of that kind of thinking, not considering things that are possible, and so not acting on them and actually creating the sense of doom and the sense of quandary that we're actually afraid of realizing, and realizing it as a result of what we've done in our own thinking.
So it's impossible, right, Philip?
Should I respond to that, Jack?
How much would it be to keep it an extra week? I'm willing to pay another. They let you keep it as long as you want.
Feed the animals.
They let you. There's no charge once they drop it off, right? Can't you just leave it there all week?
No. You have street parking, all that stuff. No, I don't have to move it. I have movers that are coming to do it tomorrow morning. I mean, I put it off.
The plot thickens.
I put it off since Friday. It was supposed to be delivered on Thursday and then Friday, but I was too sick, and then moved it from. It was supposed to be delivered yesterday, and then it was going to be taken apart today and put together. So I just moved it to Monday, but I'm almost better. I'm on the last day of antiviral, so I should probably test negative tomorrow or the next day. So yeah.
How about the acting career problems? What could you have done better to make it so that?
To be honest, a lot of it is just
compared to usual.
I think a lot of it, I have a good understanding of why I haven't made it yet. And I think a lot of it has to do with just the circumstances that I was, No, I just think for me, what it is like, I was taken care of to pursue acting by my dad till I was like 28. So 5 years after college. And so I didn't really have a good I think for me, I just didn't really have a good understanding of how the real world works and how to develop relationships in the way that I need and all that kind of stuff. And then I kind of was on a crash course from, 28 till now, these last 8 years. And I think, I had to spend some time, making money and doing
Philip,
a beat career. But yeah.
Any possibility that the possibility of you being right is not right in all what you're describing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's all conjecture. It's all just conclusions to give you the impression that you're justified in having things the way they are. And I'm going to guarantee you things are the way they are, regardless of whether you justify them or rationalize them. And no good will come from the premise of making believe that your rationalization of how things are is how things are. What will come is more rationalization and more justification to end up manifesting circumstances to prove that the story you're telling is correct.
Mm-hmm.
And that's even sicker. To begin to see that we're actually telling a story to maintain the thing we claim that we wish wasn't the way that it is, and we're actually manifesting words to contort it into the thing that we claim we don't want. That is a self-serving mechanism, and it's exactly what that self-centered thought does. So, Anthony, to your point about thinking somehow or another, my involvement here is not to help you get better at telling stories. My involvement is not to get better at telling stories, but actually look at things in principled ways so we can actually start interacting with each other on a basis that makes what's actually possible. And when we start doing that, we're going to begin considering things that right now we think are impossible and end up seeing the world as full of possibilities rather than the impossibilities we're absolutely certain are condemning us to the thinking we're doing. That's the job. We're living in a world right now where people at an all-time rate are struggling, suicides at an all-time rate, addictions at an all-time rate. People are these kids are creating homicide for some reason or another. I don't have to even surmise to simply admit that it's insane. And for that to be the best conclusion for an 18 or 19-year-old to come to is a suggestion that we as a society are dealing with illness that we are not talking about openly and accurately. And to think of it as something that we want to just simply sum up because we wrap up a new story about our own existence and think somehow the world's better because we feel better is a pretty paltry approach to a capacity we have that is unlimited and absolute. And I'm not saying that because it's something I do well. I am saying it because I want to get better at talking about it so the actions I take are more aligned with that than malaligned with the sort of repetition of this other form of thinking that's been so popular and common. So common is to think that it can't be stopped and to think that there's nothing we can do, while in fact we talk about nothing we can do and don't do the thing we can do while we're talking about nothing we can do. It's the same thing as seeing what you just saw when you said, oh, about the story. Manifesting the exact conclusion we're claiming not to want.
And I just want to take this minute to thank Philip for being so honest. I mean, that was really, I love that honesty there. And then also for our podcasters at home that don't have the benefit of seeing Philip, he's like one of the best looking male actors I know. So I'm just guessing he probably has no coping skills at all. He just used his looks all the way, cute kid. I was like, whatever they do is okay, So at some point that has to play into it. But thanks for your honesty. I really feel like I got a lot out of that.
You're welcome, Anthony. I also used to be 260 pounds until I was 18. So,
see, the plot thickens, plot twist.
So I used to have to, I have probably whether it was slighted on my good looks. I wish that was true because it would be a much easier story to deal with. But what Jack was saying, I mean, it just hasn't happened because it hasn't happened. And that's it. But that being said,
that's great. I love that.
I've had opportunities. I've had tastes. I've worked with Oscar winners. I've worked, I've had I still have agents and managers. I'm still pursuing it. So it just hasn't happened because it hasn't happened. It hasn't been the right time or whatever. Or
Have
whether
you
it's
ever
going
said
to
that
happen or
before this
not,
show?
I don't know.
Have you ever said those exact words before? It hasn't happened because it hasn't happened. That sounds so much better, than
I
anything
feel
else.
like I have, but I don't feel like I've actually
Believe it.
Yeah, maybe.
You're like,
Maybe.
if I would have just been there till 29, it would have changed so much. It would have been so much different.
But do you see the difference in saying something in absolute
Yeah.
terms? As general as it is, it settles the issue. It resolves the questions. It gives a moment of reprieve from the constant harping and thought about what should be, what could have been, what would have been, what might be, what must be, what shall be, what has to be. All that other stuff evaporates. It simply hasn't happened.
Because
And
it hasn't happened.
the freedom, Philip, I mean, to think that we need to be near death or sick before we give our best performance shows how much our energy is spent heading in directions that have no basis other than the direction we choose to think they go.
And you're one of my favorite actors on this show.
Thank you, Anthony. I appreciate that.
Because we all act a little. The whole world is but a stage. We're all actors.
Well, considering that there's, an actor who comes here at times who's very accomplished, I appreciate that, Anthony.
So the roles we choose to play are not who we are any more than someone who plays King Lear starts to run England.
I love that. I love how you saying that. The roles we choose to play are not who we are. That sounds like Shakespeare. I don't know about you.
Well, he talked about it.
Yeah, the roles we choose to play. Not that we are given. Your dad didn't give, you know what I mean? He gave me that role. I didn't want that role. I got the wrong role. It's the role. Play it. Play the cards you're dealt with.
It's different than thinking we're condemned to doing what we're doing, because
Yeah.
we're always free to choose. If we're free to choose, what we're doing is what we choose. And if we choose it, we want it. Our will, our self-will, are the choices made within the obsessive thinking. Our will are the choices we make in the freedom of recognizing that our source is not obsessive at all.
Yeah.
The difference is one is going to lead to chronic problems, and the other one is going to begin to realize things that we can't even imagine within the confines of any limited thinking.
Yeah, and I'm actually writing that down. The role we choose to play is not who we really are.
But that comes to the point that thinking who we think we are is not who we are. Who we are is who we are.
And it took an actor. You sold me that role, Philip. That's what I love about it. It took a great actor to make me see that. And then I find out he had movers. That was the turning point. That was the part of the movie I didn't expect.
I appreciate you all coming. I'm thankful that we get to do this. I look forward to continuing to develop the conversation so that the ears listening, including ours, can begin to look at what we're doing as a collective and see how we can do it better, to begin to look at the underlying problem as something we share rather than something we each have in the individual circumstances that we try to use to bring attention to the things we're doing by creating them for the sake of having something that bothers us to deal with. And start to notice this unified nature between us. We've done it. We've seen things collectively. We've had bits of awareness that have kind of popped. You had a couple of them today, Anthony. I think Philip had one of them. Thinking in absolute terms allows us to speak to things in general ways. It is what it is. It is as it is. What's happening is happening. What hasn't happened hasn't happened. We don't have to include because in there.
Yeah.
And if you take the word apart, because, it's because. And if we are, then what we do, we're causing, and the choices we make and the effects that come, we're asking for.
Well, it's a lot less to memorize. It's a lot less lines to have to remember as in a play, right?
But the beauty of it is, Anthony, you can begin to use language in a very, very efficient, useful manner.
Yeah.
It begins to address things that actually stop people from the thing they think they have to do, in the sense that they begin to actually hear something that they already know, but simply haven't had words to. And the internal conversation that they've had about thinking to themselves has been perpetuating those stories to the point that they're often insane. And I would say it's insane to begin with, but it takes time very often to recognize it. And you offer that light. There's no darkness that can ever be kept from light, ever. None. So the possibility of actually enlightenment and expressing things that are accurate and brilliant in the sense that they express light,
Yeah.
and enlightened in the sense that they express light, is ever present for us.
Right. And like a hammerhead shark doesn't go around swimming, go, I wish I was a great white shark. Then it would really be able to do stuff.
So those are things to notice about the thinking that we all do in relation to the ideas we have about how things would be if they were only the way they aren't, rather than begin to concede that things are exactly as they are as a result of how they are. Now I can actually start to make decisions based on how things actually are, rather than how I've conceived of them, and rather than have my life based on more and more flimsy, unstable, insane, irrational thoughts. I start operating on a basis that's absolutely always been there, but I haven't bothered to express.
Bingo.
We're here to express that source. We're capable of undermining it. My sense is if we've done it as long as we have through human history, there's absolutely no requirement to continue. And the only thing that's ever changed humans' minds is talking about things openly. And it generally starts with being held in contempt for having the audacity to contest what seems like convention and seems true and real.
Copernicus.
People who maintain it. Yeah, Copernicus would be a good example. Martin Luther King would be a more recent example. Gandhi would be a good example. There's plenty of people in history who have been ridiculed and crucified for their thoughts. Joan of Arc, on and on and on. But there's more modern people that it's happening to that are never heard of. That are
See, and
condemned
there's the mental obsession. I go into, well, who was the most? Was it Copernicus? Is he the guy?
Well, but he's a good example, and that would be enough. And there are other good examples today. But the point is that what is true and real always prevails. It always prevails. It always prevails because it's never interrupted. It is not interrupted by our beliefs or our faiths or our misfortunes or our lack of hope or our hope in things that are hopeless. Hope is generally reserved for people who are hopeless. What are they hoping for? That their hopelessness will go away. What are they hoping for? Something that has no basis. Why are they hopeless?
You said generally reserved. What is the rest for, though? If it's the part that's not generally reserved.
Hit me again on that.
I'm just teasing anybody. And what if we could just do the show like every day? Is that possible, Jack?
We are doing it every day. And that's part of the point of
I
this.
perform better when it's being recorded, I found out. Damn it. It's the other 6 days that are killing me.
Part of the point of this is to also start to have the conversation in the world we walk through on a daily basis, not as a demand, not as a requirement, but as a chance to begin to interact with people on insights that we each may feel are valuable enough to share. And it doesn't matter whether they think it's preposterous or ridiculous or insane or not worth listening to, because it's certainly as valuable as the insanity we've been perpetuating and the stories we've been telling to think we're connecting with people by connecting with stories that they're telling and think that somehow we're all going to figure it out by managing these narratives. There is no narrative in the present. It's only what's happening. To speak from that is to actually express the nature of our existence rather than the ideas we have about truth and reality.
So is there a problem that you have that's possibly bigger than the one, like whatever problem you're working on right now, Jack, is it possible that there's something bigger that you don't even know about?
Yes, if it's possible, it's possible. But I would say that the biggest problem is thinking that the source of my thinking isn't the problem. And when I think it's not the problem, I got a real problem. Because I'm constantly looking for problems to create problems to justify that what I'm doing isn't what I'm doing.
So I'm going to write that down because he said
that's just that whole loop. Anyway, I'm going to end this. I appreciate everyone listening. If you consider what's talked about and don't worry about making decisions and dismissing it, and see where it fits, you may find that as you do that, you'll find that there's something occurring that doesn't seem to be, like Jackie talked about that experience she had that she thought was accidental in the midst of what was happening because she'd never had that awareness, sort of that bubble pop and see that thing. It wasn't an accident. It's just a simple consequence of looking at things accurately. So if you're willing to do that when you engage with people around that level, and it can start by the talking you do in your own head, by the way, because if we've been talking to a self that doesn't exist, certainly when we start speaking to something that may well exist well beyond the thinking we do, it's a very different conversation to begin to engage in that absolute conversation and realize that if that's the source, that source knows everything already. We're not telling it anything. We're just beginning to introduce our thinking to that absolute source. And where we go with it will probably be a lot more useful and whole and valuable than the things we've been doing, trying to make believe it's up to us to figure it out. So I love you guys, listeners and otherwise. Anthony, you're a good man. Philip.
Thank you, everybody.
Jackie, you're a good woman. MK, it's good to see you again. And to those who left already, ciao. Arrivederci.
Thank you. Arrivederci.